Okay, stage is all yours, Tom.
Brilliant. Let me go. Okay, so the genesis of this session was to try and work out how many versions of Teams there are, quote unquote. And as I've gone through this deck, I keep adding things to it every single time. So I say I'm sure there's something I've missed. Feel free to keep me honest if you think there's something. And then also I'd love questions throughout. So throw them in the chat, jump off and mute, whatever you feel like. Just for context, why would you listen to me? I spend all my time in this space pretty much. So I've been in the Microsoft UC space since the kind of OCS days, up through Link and Skype, and obviously into Teams. Teams putting me very much into cloud these days. MVP, certified master back in the Skype days. And I worked at a UC specialist for the last 11 years. I've just broken out to do my own thing, but working with all kinds of customers, but lots of multinationals, lots of big customers, so which always throws up some interesting conversations. My new role, I've got a company called Empowering Cloud, and we're working on training content for Teams experts, basically. So an online platform, still in the progress of making the platform and the content at the moment, but that's the big plan. And I'm also doing a solutions director role at Pure IP, who are a global telco. So I'm getting some really good insights into the back end of the telco world as well. So it's all Microsoft Teams, right? That's how Microsoft presents it. Like they give us this, 270 million monthly active user number, and it's all just Teams, but it kind of isn't really, because actually there's a lot of different variants in what Microsoft calls Teams, and the way I think it makes sense to break it down is you've got different kind of services or tenant types, depending on how you want to think about it. So that's the first point, where you'd have different types of Teams. Then you've got licenses for users and licenses for devices and functionality, where it will split what you've got access to in terms of your Teams experience. And finally, you've got a lot of different clients, and the clients world is quite interesting as well, because there's, for example, there's half a dozen different Android variants of clients for Teams, all with different functionality. So we're going to step through those three worlds: the tenant, the licenses, and the clients, and look at what the differences are. So let's start off with tenants. So tenants is a classic SASE way of saying things, but it's your instance on the Microsoft cloud, and there are different types of tenants that have different functionality. At the highest level, you've got Microsoft Teams commercial. So you've got Microsoft Teams for work, if you like. They don't call it for work, but the one that probably most of us on this session understand and use every day as part of Office 365. So that by far is the most common scenario for Teams. But you also have some other SKUs or cloud services. So you have Microsoft Teams Free, which is a completely free forever service. In that scenario, you're using a Microsoft consumer account, a Microsoft ID, like an Outlook.com account or similar, to access a really basic service, Teams only, 60 minutes meetings and you get cut off, 100 participants a meeting, and that's Microsoft's completely free forever kind of tier. Hot off the press, announced just recently, you have Microsoft Teams Essentials. So this is a new SKU, and it's a SKU for just Teams. So previous to now, you couldn't buy a Teams functionality that wasn't part of Office 365. But what Microsoft have seen is that there's a segment of customers who just want a UC and meetings collaboration solution. So maybe they're a Google house, maybe they're using some third-party hosted email, third-party hosted IT. They're quite happy with that, but they do want meetings and calling, and that's where Essentials plays. So $4 per user per month list US dollars, and that's only $1 below the basic Office 365 plan, which makes it questionable value for a lot of people, but that's not the person targeted by this. If you want all of Office 365, you will buy all of Office 365. It's trying to target people who are almost overwhelmed by Office 365. They just want meetings and that's it. So that's the model there. It's scoped down to 50 users, so it is an SMB slash very low level SMB market play. You can essentially do everything you need to do on Teams, and you can add phone to that as well. I'll talk about that more in a second. Free and Essentials, I note here, have some important limitations. So their consumer account, there's no recording, no breakout rooms, no webinars, no guest access, no apps and app integrations. And a lot of that is because you're using Teams consumer accounts or Microsoft consumer accounts. So a lot of that functionality relies on the back end. There's no recording because you've not really got OneDrive and SharePoint to put your recordings in, for example. There is a weird twist here for any partners, that there is an option to buy Microsoft Teams Essentials from a CSP, a Microsoft reseller, licensed reseller. And in that case, Essentials uses the Active Directory, Azure Active Directory identity, and then suddenly all the other features light up. So Microsoft don't explain this super clearly in the marketing, but these two essentials are quite different. If you go through a CSP, you're getting channels, meetings, recording, transcription, noise suppression, because there's a legit Office 365 AAD tenant behind it. Still capped to users, but it's up to 300 users, so it's basically the business SKU with the other bits turned off, if you like. And then last but not least, you've got Microsoft Teams Personal. So that is your straight, I'm a home user, targeted at home users. Can you compare the functionality of Teams Essentials with the Teams Exploratory? I can. I've got that on a slide, Dan. It's a good question. So I will get onto the Teams Exploratory license in a few slides, but Teams Essentials is a full and permanent license. Teams Exploratory is a temporary access to essentially E3 level Teams for a fixed period of time for free to get you into it, basically. Great question, thank you. So if we look at Teams here on this slide, you've got kind of free and essentials are the very, very low end service. Office 365 Work Commercial is the one that nearly everybody's going to be using. That's your E1, E3, E5 type scenarios. You've got this odd one out here of Essentials from a CSP where you're using Azure AD, but it's the Essentials edition. And then you've got Personal, which is the version you'll see in, say, Windows 11. So let's jump into Personal. This is always a Microsoft consumer account. You can sign up for this via actually a phone identity or a email identity, because Microsoft ID Consumer, you can sign up by phone now. You get 24 hours calls for free. There's really odd marketing around this. So they make a distinction between how long a peer-to-peer call can be to try and set different levels of the plans. I don't know who's doing a 24-hour one-to-one call, but there you go. You get cut off after 24 hours in theory. I haven't tested to prove you get cut off. The meetings are capped at 100 participants in 60 minutes, although they waived that for COVID. So essentially you can do proper big meetings, 300 users, 24 hours on Teams Personal at the moment. It uses the same client as everything else on Teams, but you can't sign in devices, so Teams Phone, Teams Room systems or whatever, on a Teams Personal. You can't sign in those consumer accounts onto Teams. You can't sign devices in on consumer accounts. But for your phone client, your mobile, your desktop client, you can sign those in and you can tenant switch, essentially, this icon here, between consumer account and Office 365 accounts. An interesting feature thing here, Teams Personal includes SMS. So you can literally have two-way conversations between Teams and a mobile phone number, and the person on the mobile phone receives a text, an SMS message, and it goes back and forth on chat. And that's limited to the countries on screen, but there is plans to expand that, and it's really interesting, I think, that you can get that in Personal, but you can't get SMS in Office 365 Business. So if I was a betting person, I'd say they've built the infrastructure out. At some point, we'll see SMS in the Work edition, but we shall see. Also super interesting, there's a new personal only client for Windows 11. So some of you may have seen this if you jump to Windows 11. This is personal, so it has no channels. This is the new client technology that Microsoft are moving towards, and it uses a technology called WebView 2 and an engine that's part of the Edge browser, whereas the traditional client uses Electron and the Chromium engine essentially. So if you want to get a jump on where Teams is going, if you have a look at the consumer client at some point, and there's no timeline I'm aware of on this, at some point I would expect the enterprise client to move from the Electron model they have currently to the new model. And it's nice, it's a really snappy client, it's really good. It's all been built from the ground up basically. For Microsoft Personal or Microsoft Free, it's all essentially kind of self-help support. That you can buy Office 365 as an individual, as a personal account, and you can buy Office 365 as a family. For Teams, it doesn't really make any difference. You get all the same functionality whether you're a paid Office 365 consumer or an individual. And with consumer or personal, there's no way to add PSD and conferencing. There's no way to add phone. So you have to step up to work or enterprise to get those features. Pause for breath. Any questions around personal, or anybody use personal? I'm super interested in as well. I don't see much use of it in my circles in the UK, to be honest.
I'm actually using it with my family. After we moved down from Berlin to the border of
Switzerland. Did they do that willingly, Dennis, or did you force them?
Now they're doing it willingly.
Oh, that's cool. How have you found it functionally?
I actually created my own tenant when this Teams preview was starting before with my Outlook account, and I totally broke our Outlook.com accounts. I could not join the personal experience anymore before I have removed the Azure AD created accounts in my family tenant that was created in the trial period. But now we are working with the personal accounts and the personal space, and it works pretty good.
Yeah, I think it was a bit bumpy when it was initially released in terms of how it deals with identity, particularly if you've got vanity domains on Office 365 on Microsoft Personal. It gets all confused. But they seem to have ironed most of that out now. They're making a really big push with Essentials and with Personal to try and get it to be used as not just a business platform. So you'll see more and more push on this. And they were, I think, fairly aggressive on bundling it into Windows as well. So Windows 11 boots with it in consumer, and you can only sign into Windows 11 consumer with a live ID, a Microsoft account. Sorry, there's 8 ways to say the same thing in everything Microsoft. And Teams pops up and basically more or less lets you start using it. So they're going to push that more and more and more. Yeah, WhatsApp is the dominant force over here. Okay, so that's personal, and that's kind of personal out the way for now. Now we'll talk more about the work or the enterprise one. And again, I know we've got some real experts on here, so do keep me honest if you think anything's not right or you've got things to add. So this is your tenant type. So when you sign up to Office 365, there are kind of a couple of different tenant types that control what functions are even available to you. So the typical tenant type is commercial, and that's most Office 365 users. There are different SKUs within commercial tenants. There are business, enterprise, edu, non-profit. Functionally, they all have access to the same type of functions, although you will find if your tenant is flagged as edu or flagged as health, there'll be certain settings, templates that are pushed forward to you as being more useful. So particularly around education, you'll see releases of Microsoft around Teams where they'll say this feature or that feature is only available to education tenants, and that applies globally. Government is super interesting. So the first thing about government is it should be called US government because it's only available to US. So I see customers around the world, particularly my European customers, they're like, well, we're a government department, we need a government tenant, and it's like, no, it's just US, sorry. So it's very tied around the US rules and regulations. They actually have different subcategories. They have GCC High, which is slightly higher level, and DoD is the highest one. So that's Government Community Cloud. Everything rolls out much slower in GCC. I've had the opportunity to work with some GCC customers, and it's like literally months to up to 10 months sometimes for features to come. And the reason for that is they put things into commercial cloud, but to get them into GCC, they have to hit all these higher infosec requirements and regulations, and it has to be on these kind of sovereign cloud locations and things. So some of the services that they put into commercial cloud, even if you're a regional tenant, you will occasionally reach out of your region to use a service. Let's say, I don't know this one for a fact, but let's say transcription. They'll build it as a giant cloud service, and your file will go and get transcribed from that in real time. In the government cloud, that's not allowed. It can't go out to the generic cloud service. So they have to build either instances or get special approval to get those things through. So if you're ever dealing with GCC or any of the government tenants, you have to watch carefully for what you say in terms of what they've got, because 9 times out of 10, if it's anything new, they won't have it yet. This is the only tenant type, the GCC tenant type, the government tenant type, that can bring your own PSTN conferencing, which is quite interesting. Again, I think from a regulatory point of view, they needed a private route conferencing option for PSTN conferencing. So there's a company called Call Tower, a good company in the US, who have private connections into GCC tenants, and there is no option in GCC to buy the Microsoft PSTN conferencing. You go third party. There's also the fun China tenant, 21 FireNet. That has 0 Teams whatsoever. Technically, it's illegal to use Teams in China. Doesn't stop a whole bunch of organizations using it. It seems to be technically illegal, but not actively pursued. But I'm not a lawyer and I don't live in China, so don't take my word for it. If you have an official 21 VNet tenant, you're still using Skype for Business. There is no Teams in that tenant. And you might well have heard of Go Local tenants, where you're situating your data, at least, in a regional workload. So Germany has this, UK has this, more and more are popping up. You, generally speaking, you're still a commercial customer, so you still have the same functionality, but you may find some features roll out to Go Locals slower. So they just haven't got it to that regional instance yet. And this is part of the fun of Office 365, is features roll out to different tenant types at different times, but they also roll out to different tenants of the same type at different times. So you really can't predict the timeline for upgrades. And Teams is even funner still. They don't roll out functionality on a per tenant basis as such. It's more like groups of users. So you may well find in your environment different users have different functionality at different times. It's not like everybody in your tenant necessarily gets the feature at exactly the same time. Sometimes that'll be rolling client updates, sometimes that'll be rolling feature updates, rolling whitelists, but it's quite a fun agile world. And as well as those tenant types, Microsoft have some specific templates or use cases. So sometimes you'll hear them talk about different business use cases. This doesn't mean you've got a completely different tenant type. It's more like they have templates and features that they will turn on or off to make it more suitable. So if you're in retail or manufacturing, that they might push some of the first line worker scenarios to say these are useful features for you. Okay, on to licenses. Any questions or comments about tenants before I jump forward? All right, all good. Nobody's left, so that's good. Right, we're into the license fund now. So you've got your tenant, and at the highest level, tenant is going to control what functionality is available to you. But then license is the next level down, that is going to light up or not light up certain features for your users. And certain features for devices, which we'll talk about in a second. So on the user license level, you've got business level of Microsoft Office 365, which is up to 300 users. Essentially, a slightly cheaper license with slightly more features aimed at SMB, SMC. From a Teams point of view, There's not a lot of difference. Business Basic is the version of Office 365 where you get just the service and no fat desktop clients. But Teams desktop client is free to use for everybody. So even if you buy Teams, or even if you buy Business Basic, you still get the proper Teams client on desktop, on mobile, etc. There's no license association there. You step up to Business Standard and they add the webinar functionality in. So that's turned off for Business Basic, but other than that, they're pretty much the same. E1 or A1, so that's enterprise or academic. There's actually a G series as well for the government clouds, G135. E3 is where a lot of Office 365 users work. Oh yeah, F, good, thank you for that. Yeah, there's F3, F5 for frontline workers or first line workers. They've gone back and forward on that. Thank you very much for that. E3 is where most people sit, and that is all the Teams functionality, but no phone, no conferencing. You can add those on a la carte, which we'll talk about as add-on licenses. We'll talk about in a second. A5, E5, that's the level that Microsoft really want you at, where you get a whole lot of stuff bundled in, including your phone license and your conferencing. So that is where Microsoft will try and push most customers. And then there's advanced comms add-on, which is I don't really see the value of, speaking frankly. This license has gone backwards and forwards. If anybody follows my blog, I've done probably half a dozen blog posts on this where they're like, you need advanced comms for call recording. No, you don't. Now maybe you do. No, you don't. That for a while, things like contact center were part of advanced comms for the briefest time. It feels like a license looking for a problem to monetize, to be honest. But at the moment, for that license, you get a lobby logo. So pre-joining the meeting, you can put your business logo at the top right hand of the lobby. So if you join a Microsoft meeting, you'll see the Microsoft logo, literally a little graphic. You can do custom together mode scenes, so you can do your own business together mode scenes, and you can do custom policy packages to push out policies to groups of users. There's nothing in those policy packages that you couldn't do manually with some PowerShell and some smarts, but it makes it a lot easier. I don't know inherently what makes any of those things particularly advanced comms as such, but there it is. It's a license. It's an ongoing conversation. I don't have any customers with it. I don't know if anybody does, but there are promo periods for it, and they keep extending these promos to give people a chance to try it. And the exploratory license that Dennis mentioned earlier, this is interesting. I mean, this is just generally a theme with Office 365. They want people to onboard to new services. So if you have a SKU of Office 365 which doesn't have Teams, and there really aren't many SKUs that there used to be, you used to be able to go and buy standalone Exchange and things like that. Most of what Microsoft push now is all some kind of bundle with Teams. But if you don't have Teams in your SKU and you hit a Teams URL or a Teams meeting, it will ping up and say, hey, welcome, have this free for a year to play with, and we'll true you up later. What's interesting, and I think a lot of IT pros take exception to, or admins take exception to, is Microsoft more and more are letting users do this stuff without admin control by default. So you haven't rolled out Teams in your organization, you haven't even bought it. If you're not paying attention to what Office 365 is doing, you haven't disabled this, you could find half your business are using Teams on the exploratory license without you even realizing as such. Now, obviously, if you watch your message center and you look at your user stats and everything, you would know. But the emphasis for Microsoft is to pull people through to use more of this stuff by default. So lots more enabled by default. So on the user licensing, if we wanted to add PSTN conferencing, so dial-in numbers and dial-out numbers for meetings, this is something that's changing right now. Previously, it was around £3 sterling per user, or for if you were an enterprise agreement customer, you could have pay-as-you-go, where you pay per minute for conferencing. What Microsoft have changed is they're going to bundle conferencing included in the price for pretty much every Office 365 SKU from March. So that is a huge change in terms of value for customers who have either previously been paying for that or haven't been paying for that. I think it's a great value. Now, granted, Microsoft are upping the license prices around the same time, so you might be giving with one hand and taking away with the other. But I think for a lot of customers, that's really great value. And also, if you haven't enabled conferencing now, there are 12-month promo licenses in the tenant, so you can go and light this up for all your users right now for free, and know that it's still going to be free/included in the price post March as well. Do be aware there's a additional cost in some conferencing scenarios. So dialing out from the conference to certain countries, having free phone dial-in numbers to conferencing, that is charged per minute. And there's a concept called comms credits, communications credits, which is like a prepaid wallet. So you load up some money into it and it gets burnt down. And if you do it with a credit card, it will just keep re-uploading if you agree to it. I've seen some big businesses not completely understand that and spend some good money. And it's things like users not realizing that outbound calling from conferences costs the business money, so they just do it for convenience and don't understand. And it's not everywhere. It's places like UAE and other places where telephony costs are a lot. So a tip to take away from this session is to watch your comms credit spend and make sure you understand where that money's going. Teams Phone. So again, if you're an E3 or equivalent customer, if you want to add straight Teams Phone, which is just the phone functionality, you still need to add calling plans or some kind of PSTN connectivity. That is £6 per user list. What Microsoft were bundling is Microsoft 365 Business Voice. And that included both a phone and a call plan, but that is being depreciated in March, so imminently, and they've replaced it with a Teams phone and calling plans bundle. The interesting difference there is that the Microsoft Business Voice had a SKU for partners where they could sell you both the phone license and their own direct routing. The calling plan bundle is, as the name sounds, it's only Microsoft's calling plans. So Microsoft are trying to make it simpler to understand their licensing and transact, and they think that a whole bunch of people just want to buy a phone and a phone number in one hit, which I think makes sense. So they're getting rid of those variants. If you're a customer that needs direct routing, you would buy the phone standard license and the direct routing or operator connect from another carrier. Again, I'm getting into telephony terminology, so feel free to jump in on voice or on the chat if you've got any questions about that. So here's the ability to add a phone number and minutes to Teams. So you've got three options. You can buy your minutes and your phone numbers from Microsoft. You can buy them from the partner market, the carrier market, either via direct routing or via operator connect. The difference there is direct routing, anybody can do it. You require a certified session border controller. You connect that back up to Microsoft on a tenant by tenant basis, and you can provide service. So there's no certification or approval for a direct routing vendor. Anybody can do it. I can spin an audio codes SPC up in Azure, connect it to Gamma or to Twilio or anything else, and advertise myself as a direct routing provider. So just a tip there in terms of choosing providers, make sure you're choosing someone who understands, cloud architectures, and it probably is a reputable carrier. Operator Connect is different. Operator Connect is a certified program from Microsoft where the carrier or the operator is network peered directly to Microsoft on the back end. There's no per tenant config, none of the setting up the SPC in the individual tenant. It's all GUI driven on the tenant side, so you can just go in, pick a carrier. You have to, as a customer, sign up with that carrier, so that will either be web-based or via traditional contract, and then you can order and assign numbers directly on the web. So you don't need all the direct routing config, the which number routes where. All that magic is handled on the back end by the carrier. But also the carrier, and I should say, I work for Pure IP, they are Operator Connect, so there's loads of other Operator Connect carriers available. But the carrier is signed up to Microsoft with a support agreement, joint support. They have Microsoft certifications. They are peered, they're monitored at a network level. So there's a bar for Operator Connect, which is you have to be in good standing with Microsoft to be approved and be on it. So it's a useful bar, I think, to choose operators. And on the Microsoft calling plan side, you have a few different options. So you've got 120 and 240 domestic plans, but they're not available by default. They're only if you ask for them and if you're a sizable customer. And then you've got your typical 1200 and 2400 and domestic and international minutes plans. And the price is on euros there in the screen. So you'll see different plans turn up as far as those 120 and 240 turn up, depending on which tenant you're working on and if they've been approved. Interestingly, the way those plans work is quite different to traditional telephony. So when you buy a plan, the minutes are bundled per plan per country. And this is quite important to understand. So if I buy or let's say I buy 3 US minute plans of 120, I end up with 360 minutes between those 3 users. So it's not 120 minutes per user, it's a combined bundle or pot of minutes per user. When those users burn down their minutes, by default they'll roll on to communication credits, they'll pay per minute. And it's not all your 120 minute plans, it's your 120 minute plans in one country. So you can end up with these interesting scenarios if you don't watch this, where a set of users are paying per minute and you've got tons of minutes in another pot. So if I buy some 120 minute plans and some 240 minute plans, and one of my 120 minute users goes crazy on the phone that month, it can end up costing me per minute money, even though I've got plenty of minutes available in my tenants. That I'm not using them. So you do need to monitor that a little bit. If you're on the 1200 minute plans, that's so many minutes compared to your typical user. You rarely hit the edges, to be honest. But if you're on those tighter plans, it can happen. And on the flip side, you want to watch your usage there, because very often you're not getting anywhere near the size of those big plans. So if you do have a reasonable amount of users and you're using calling plans and you're not using enough of them, do go to Microsoft and say, hey, look, we're paying X per calling plan and we don't use it. Can we get access to those 240 or 120 minute calling plans? Also worth knowing, domestic users can make international calls via pay per minute, via communication credits. So I do see customers buying the international plans because they think someone can't do it and will make an odd international call and spending too much money. If you have a domestic plan, you make the odd international call, it can be done through comms credits. Again, I have yet to see mathematically many people that make enough international calls to tip the balance where paying per minute is less cost effective than paying for the bundle. So you look at your users, look at your use cases, but it's important to right size this stuff. So that was all user licenses. There are also some device or function licenses. So there's Microsoft Phone standard virtual users. These are free licenses, but you need to assign them to things like auto attendance and bots or contact center integration. So no cost, you just grab them, but they're functionally a virtual endpoint to assign phone numbers to. Common area phone license, so that is for a device for a common area phone. It includes the phone license, but it doesn't include the PSTN connectivity, so you'd need one of those options above. And then this is another interesting space to watch, Microsoft Teams Room Standard and Microsoft Teams Room Premium licenses. When Microsoft Teams Room Premium license launched, it was very much launched as a managed service for Teams Rooms. It was Microsoft Teams Rooms Managed MMS, I think, although they didn't like the term MMS. It's morphing into more of a premium license with premium features. So it's quite a big step up in cost. It includes a managed service, but it will start to include other features as well. So worth keeping an eye on. I have seen some customers be quite happy with that price point for managing their room systems, but when you get to a scale where you've got a lot of room systems, that is real money per month. That adds up really fast. So it's an interesting scenario where Microsoft are offering some premium add-ons there. Does it make sense for the customer? Is all down to the individual customer. For licenses, so those set up how your individual users or functions work. The last piece of this puzzle as to what you get in Teams or functionality you have is your software clients. So you have the web clients. Obviously, Chrome and Edge Chromium, the new Edge is the supported one. IE 11 is not supported in any shape or form. Safari, they've gone a bit back and forward on this. It is supported, but it will push you towards the proper Mac client more often than not in terms of full functionality. I wouldn't recommend it. I would use the full client on a Mac, but it is there. And you can use those on things like Chromebooks as well, although you can use the Teams app on a Chromebook. Obviously, your PC/desktop clients. So we mentioned it earlier. You've got the new Teams personal app for Windows 11 with the new technologies. That is only for Teams personal. You've got the classic Windows Team app, the one that probably most of us are using. That is an Electron wrapper, which is a development framework, essentially wrapping a web app into a desktop app. And Microsoft are moving away from that towards the new WebView 2 stuff. So it served a really good purpose. It built a very fast client that they've added a lot to. But in terms of optimizing, I think they're starting to hit some limits around what they can do with Electron versus what they want to do with their own stack. Mac client, also Electron. There's no M1 optimized client or anything like that. It runs on the Mac, and I don't know how much it's using the emulation on M1, but it will run fine on an M1 Mac, so there's no problem there. And I mentioned this earlier, there's no licensing at all on any desktop client. So you can, as any account, any combination, you can use desktop clients. Obviously, we've got iOS, we've got iPhone, iPad, we've got Android mobile, and that's available in the Google App Store, the Amazon Store, and some of the regional stores as well. I can't remember the name of the Chinese, they're not Chinese store, the Asia store, but there's a few others where it's available. That is your first party end user software clients. We've also got devices. Now, devices, I think, are interesting because they're all variants of the same client. So for Microsoft Teams Room for Windows, you have got a Windows underlying operating system on a Microsoft Teams Room, so basically a PC. And then you have a Windows-based client experience, although that is also using a web client under the cover. So there is some functionality that is like a web client on the Microsoft Teams Room Windows. That's maintained and updated by Windows Update. You've got Surface Hub. That has the Windows 10 Team Edition OS and a slightly different Teams client written for that use case. That client experience was quite behind the times up until recently. They've put a lot of work into it, and Surface Hub is becoming more of a genuine pitch around being a Teams endpoint. It was a bit of an addition before, but now it is being pushed more and more as a genuine Teams endpoint. And then you've got the Android family. Now these are all Android based, but all their own flavor of client. So we'll all have slightly different functionality. You've got Teams Phone, which is your classic IP phone, pick up a phone. You've got Teams Display, which is the kind of Alexa/Nest display. Oh, I've got both mine have gone off. Like the experience here. So this. My Alexa talking about Nest. You've got a really nice experience there, and there's some stuff coming from a company called Neat who are adding a display as well. But again, that didn't come out with a lot of functionality, but a lot of work's been put into that. So there's been a renewed interest in people working from home, having a permanent video endpoint rather than relying on their laptop, and that is an interesting experience there. You've got Microsoft Teams Panel. These are the room system panels for booking and room entry and room check-in and that kind of thing. That traditionally has been quite an expensive space to be in from a kit point of view, so Microsoft are kind of commoditizing that a little bit. But be aware you do need a Teams Room license for those. So where they're in a room with a Teams Room, it's fine, it's included in that license scenario. But if they're in a room where there's not a Team Room, you need to license those, and that can add up quite quickly. Teams Room System Android, what was called collaboration bars. Again, these were the poor cousin of Teams Room originally. They were limited in functionality, but they've had a lot of investment. I mean, Teams Room Android and Teams Room Windows are almost on a par for most core functionality. There are some things that Windows can do that Teams Android can't, just from a chipset and functionality perspective, but they're getting closer and closer. And I've seen a lot of popularity in the Android because it's super simple to manage. It's genuinely appliance type stuff. But equally, some people don't like Android running on their network, so there is that consideration. Hot off the press end of the year, that we've seen Facebook Portal have a client. So this is actually a variant of Teams display client in a way. It is a different variant, its own build. It comes up in the Teams app store, sorry, in the Facebook app store for that device, and it's updated via the app store in that case. But that was the first time we saw a Teams client on a consumer device. They've done it before with things like Skype. Skype is available on Alexa and other endpoints, consumer endpoints, TVs even. But this was the first step, and I think we'll see more of that, because if Microsoft want Teams consumer to be a success, they'll want to be on consumer endpoints. You've got the MTR panel. They called those out because they do have their own software. They do run Teams software as well, and essentially if you get the opportunity to set them up, so you have your Teams room and your panel, those two pair, so they run an independent client and they will pair over MAC address or IP address to find each other, so they do run their own client as well. All the Android clients bar the Facebook Portal one are managed and updated through the Teams Admin Center. So it's a really nice, consistent experience from a management point of view, and it's getting cleaner and cleaner in terms of things like remote provisioning, self-service provisioning, low-touch provisioning. I think that will only get better as well. Did I miss any devices? Anyone going to catch me out with something I've missed? I'm welcome to hear it. All right. Oh, good. And then you've got kind of, I don't know quite what to call these special client scenarios I'm going to go with, but these are different services that connect to Teams, as in the big cloud service, that are quite interesting. So VDI, there is not a specific virtual desktop infrastructure client as such. There was with Skype, there isn't with Teams. What happens is you put the Teams client in a specific mode, and then all the media scenarios, the audio, the video, get pushed to what the third-party client provider wrote. So Microsoft have their own through the Azure Virtual Desktop, Citrix have one, and VMware have one. This is a much simpler model than Skype. In Skype, there was this interactivity between the Skype client and the bit that Citrix wrote. In this model, it's very clean. Everything media is handled by the VDI partner. So it either works or it doesn't, and it's their piece of the puzzle. SIP Gateway, relatively recently released. That is a standards-based cloud gateway from Microsoft for you to connect your standard SIP phones. It is only a small selection of supported phones. You can't join any old SIP endpoints, but that will be quite popular for people who have legacy phones, things like VVXs, where they might have bought hundreds of, even thousands of them, and need to sweat that asset but want to move to Teams. You've got CVI, Cloud Video Interop, which is the ability to take standards-based video rooms and connect them to Teams through a cloud service. So those services are provided by third parties, and they're bridging the Teams meeting and the standards-based room. And you've got NDI, which I think Steve can do way more justice than I can, but that's the ability to take the meeting stream and push it through to third-party platforms for things like broadcast scenarios. So it's something that Skype did very well, and they had a whole separate version of Skype for kind of broadcast scenarios. I think they're trying to displace that with the Teams stack, but you can do some pretty interesting stuff. You can take a meeting, and take individual people's videos and place them in dynamic layouts in your own way, have your green sofa, your green room, that kind of thing. So it's quite interesting what you can do there. Session border controllers, so SBCs, that's the ability to connect voice, that's your direct routing. So again, not a Teams endpoint in a sense, but it does connect directly to Teams. Those need to be certified to be supported, and even things like Operator Connect, they're using session border controllers, just very big, beefy versions for carriers. And last but not least, the Graph API. So for anyone who's doing any kind of third-party app development or installing some of these solutions, you will be connected to Microsoft on an API basis, which again, you're connecting to the team service. So session recording for compliance, video, desktop sharing, that kind of thing. Contact centers use these APIs for things like presence, and there is a plan to have more and more API integration for contact centers. For your call detail records, your analytics, you pull those from Graph as well. And there is API access for things like compliance data, backup, exporting of teams and team data. Those are all API accessible as well. So for those that made it through, it looks like everybody made it through. That's great. We've kind of gone through the things that define what you get as a team. So at the highest level, it's your tenant. So your tenant choice or your tenant selection is going to define what features are even available to your users. Most of the time, 9 times out of 10, it's going to be some kind of commercial tenant, unless you're working with a specialist tenant like a GCC. Then next, you've got the licenses for your users. So making sure you've got the phone system license, making sure you've got the right PSTN connectivity, and for those device licenses, the common area, the MTR standard, the MTR premium. And last but not least, you've got the clients, and that's going to define what features are available. Everything here is dynamic and always also updating, so things do change. That's the nature of the cloud. But I think it's useful to have a handle on, when you're talking to customers or when you're dealing with your organization, if you're your end user, what combination of things is going to light up what functionality for your users. So with that, I will pause for breath again. I hope that was useful. Again, welcome any questions or input if anybody's got any. Hopefully that mostly made sense. Thank you. So you're now all blessed Teams licensing experts.
Thank you for the great conclusion of all the licenses and the clients. I really enjoyed it.
Good. Yeah, there's quite a lot of variability for what seems like a simple service. When you get into the conversation, there are lots and lots of differences, and it's an ever-changing landscape around that licensing as well. Things come in, things go out. But yeah, I think it's super interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
Yeah, especially this question I asked for the Teams Essentials license and the Teams Exploratory license. I had this discussion with a colleague from Munich, the Munich greater area, because they asked me what's the special thing about the Essentials license. If I'm not mistaken, I had a customer several years ago which enrolled Exchange Online licenses, only Exchange Online Plan 2 licenses. Mm-hmm. And they had the situation, the users had Azure AD accounts, synced Azure AD accounts, had a mailbox, could sync their mailbox, and started using Teams from one day to another. And it was a mess.
Yeah, it's quite interesting, isn't it, how Microsoft are getting more and more like this. They're also doing things like you can self purchase licenses now if you don't turn it off. So things like Power BI Premium and stuff like that, Power BI Pro, it'll just say to the end user, hey, wang a credit card in and buy this license. Like, well, wait a minute, where did the management go there? So I think obviously Microsoft want to get the adoption and want to push it out. That's their angle. But yeah, Exploratory was met with some interest because lots of people very specifically, to your point, thought they just bought Exchange, and suddenly at renewal they're being told that, well, they need Teams now, they're going to have to step up.
Yeah, they started putting files on SharePoint, putting files in the OneDrive that was provisioned at that point with a Teams license, because I think it was 3 gigabytes of OneDrive you got with Exploratory. Yeah. I think it's 5 gigabytes now with the Essentials license.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, I think 5. Yeah, I had it on my slide, I think. 10 gigabytes with Essentials, 5 with free.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it could lead you to problems if you haven't been aware of the Exploratory license.
Yeah. Yeah, well, you do get pinged as an admin now. I think you didn't initially. I don't think you get pinged pretty actively as an admin saying it's being used, but it's all this stuff is on by default now. That's Microsoft's MO. So if you're an admin that really cares about this stuff, or Germany again, compliance, regulatory reasons, you want to make sure you understand what your actual users have got access to.
Yeah, definitely, that's important.
Brilliant. Well, I really appreciate everybody turning out for a licensing session. I know it's not for everybody, so I appreciate the hardcore that came. Thank you. And yeah, if anybody's got any questions or feedback, feel free. You can reach me at LinkedIn, Twitter, all the usuals. I'll be around for the rest of the event, hanging in the chat as well.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Tom.